We are going to jump in to review a little bit about the ambassador program and just kind of some of the intentions behind it and the core components. I'm going to pass it over to Matt to talk for a few minutes so I can have a break.
Yeah, and it's fair to say that many of us, we got into this and we're like, this sounds like a great idea, but we've been giving you some challenges and we've gotten feedback, and I'll talk a little bit about this here in a second. Like, well, what exactly is the well-being ambassador? We would like to know a little bit more beyond the, just the mission statement or that brief onboarding that you may have been able to attend to either in person or you've seen the video of now. But really, the idea is that we want to work together and within our community to build this positive connection that supports the well-being of our youth, of our adults here in Blaine County and the Wood River Valley, as we're really thinking about what community looks like and feels like and how we can contribute to that. And so today we're going to walk through a little bit more in depth what the 3 pillars of being a well-being ambassador really look and feel like. I'll try to, in doing it, talk through some real life examples of what this looks and feels like on a day-to-day basis, so that you don't just assume that we're a program about giving a few challenges and then coming back every other month to just chat about them, because it really can be so much more than that. And a lot of it has to do with like our our micro actions that we do on a day-to-day basis that really help continue to be the individual stitches that weave together a pattern of community that we really want to be supportive of and proud of. So let's go into pillar number 1 here, or let's look at all 3 pillars completely, and then I'll go into pillar number 1. Your core 3 things that we're hoping that you really will engage with on a regular basis is this notion of community building, and we've already heard some really lovely stories about what that can look like and feel like. I'll get a little bit more nuts and bolts about what two-way communication means and what that looks like and feels like, and hopefully how we can engage in that in really authentic ways. And then finally, we will spend some time discussing what resource sharing means and what being a well-being ambassador means and what it doesn't mean. What are those boundaries that we're creating around it, so that we know when something looks and feels right, when something looks and feels like worrisome, and how we should handle those different type of events in ways that are authentic to who we are, but also represent the skills that we can bring to the table accurately. And then finally, all of these, overarching themes behind everything. So behind these 3 pillars, behind this is a lot of skill building, right? So there's an ethic that we believe that a good program not only asks of you, but also makes sure to give you things that you need to help be successful within it. And so we have this overarching theme that kind of wraps around all these pillars of understanding what the skill building looks like. And it's related to all the other pillars in so many different ways. But some examples like the internal challenges to grow your own capacity and tools. What kind of actual official training opportunities are out there to really continue to cultivate those skills? Small ways to build community from where you are now. And again, as I mentioned, like be the individual stitches that are helping to weave together a stronger community. And then the communication skills that you might need. And I mentioned, like, I am a professor of communication. I've spent my life being, a communication expert, and still can feel that my skills are rusty, or that sometimes fears and insecurities come in. And so having periodic trainings that help us overcome and think about what this looks like and feels like. So we're always building our skills so that we can also then become people that can transcend some of those skills to other people that don't have those same things. So keep that in mind, as that's kind of the holistic platform. We have these 3 pillars of actions, if you will, but wrapping around these are the skills that we want to help continue to cultivate and build within you all to be successful well-being ambassadors and in being successful at stitching together the community that we're all proud of. So now let's talk a little bit about community building. So communities in and of themselves can be a little bit of a wonky topic. A lot of times we think of communities purely geographically, like this is my community, but we have so many different communities that we are a part of. We have communities that are geographically or spatially oriented. You may be very much involved with your neighborhood or your neighborhood association, but you also have all these other groups that you might be affiliated with or members of. They could be related to your cultural backgrounds. They could be related to the interests that you have. So this idea of community building focuses on the intentional and simple acts that we have. And I mean this because it's sometimes as a well-being ambassador, because a lot of, in our bi-monthly meetings, we'll ask, how did you engage with some of the challenges that we've given you? But if we're talking about real authentic community building, that community building needs to start with much more of our orientation to our everyday action. And so some things can feel big. Like sometimes we'll challenge you and say, go out and, try to go to a new event and bring some people to it. And that's a big action. But let's talk about some day-to-day actions and what that actually looks like in terms of building community. So, for instance, one of the things that I talk about routinely is that many of us have opportunities to interact with other people, especially younger people in our communities. They're either family friends or we see them in our neighborhood. One of the things that is super important to people is to know who they are and to use them by name. And so I frequently talk about, I have littles. One of the ethics and approaches that I take to community building within my communities is that every time I go to pick up my kids, if there are other children that are still there in their classroom or they're in their hallways or I see them out in the neighborhood, I always try to stop and not just address my children because it's pickup and we've got to go, but rather also to spend a moment and say, hey, how you doing, Willow? Or how you doing, Harriet? What's going on today? How was your day at school? What simple acts like that do is it broadens the borders of what we consider our community, allows us to broaden intentionally what that feeling of family even looks like for others. And so I now know when I go to, and it's interesting what it can become of like simple acts like this. Every time I go to pick up now, I'm usually rushed by many of not only my kids, but their friends. And we end up having these like 5 or 10 minute chats with all of them there. Now that's just something that you can do with other children or youth in the community, but it's also a great act that we can do with our community members at large when we're sitting there. And today's garbage day for me, so when I go out and go put the garbage cans out, I should say tomorrow's garbage day, tonight is put the garbage out night, but routinely we're all doing it right around the same time. And so take a moment and say, hey, how you doing, what's going on? It feels odd maybe to just remember to do something so simple as to acknowledge other people. But if you look at also how some of our communities are designed, a lot of the times they're designed for us to go inside and come outside really fast. Like we pull into our driveway through a garage that's connected to our house. We don't go outside and see people on a regular basis. And so remembering to say hi when we see people out and about becomes actually more important. Part of the reason I bring this up is that the data on youth especially talks about that they're struggling to feel that connection to community. And some of that connection to community are just these micro actions that we do that let them know that they are humans and they're visible in the eyes of other people, that we don't just ignore them or we don't try to, move around them, or if we see them congregating in front of the Albertsons, that we don't just kind of look at them as if they're like something that we wish we could scrub off the sidewalk, but rather like, say hi, how are you doing? How was your day today? Because oddly enough, for some reason, youth become intimidating at some point for older people. And so breaking down those things and realizing that just saying hi can sometimes break down and make everyone human is really important. And so doing some intentional acts of just saying hello, holding a door open, acknowledging other people's existence, recognizing the other day I was recognizing that a woman was trying to come in and she was holding a bunch of items, plus also trying to bring in a child carrier. And, she was still about a half a block out, but I knew the destination she was going. And so I just paused for a second. I waited. I had the time. I held the door open for her so that she could get in through the door. These are the things that make a community actually look and feel like a community and not just an environment in which we all exist. It's the striking up of a conversation with someone new. It's the offering to help someone. It's the getting to know their names. It's the inviting someone to coffee if you see in there, or if you have a daily routine of picking up your coffee somewhere and you happen to have that same daily routine of someone else, periodically acknowledge that person. You may not have known them otherwise, but make a joke like, oh, here we are on the line again. It must be our Monday caffeine fill up that we need. And so when you're moving forward as a well-being ambassador, understand that we are creating challenges to help you become aware of the things that you could be doing. But really, authentically, that ambassador badge is a reminder to do micro actions every day if you can. We interact with people every day. And it's funny, I just had this conversation with someone else about what it means to genuinely be in a nice community. And so much of the commentary around what a nice community looks and feels like are just the small micro actions that we exhibit. that we, experience on a regular basis. So that's just a little bit more on what community building can look like and feel like. Sure, it absolutely can be bring some people to a data walk, bring some people to a community dinner, go to a new event. Those are great. Those are wonderful. But those are also a little bit more taxing on our energy on a regular basis. So, we ask you to try to do one or two every couple months. But on a daily basis, I hope that you're also engaging authentically with these notions of what can I do today to just remind people that they are humans and we exist together. So that's a little bit about community building. Let's go and talk about two-way conversations and two-way communication. Now, in many ways, this is kind of goes hand in hand with how we connect with our communities. And so when we think about two-way communication, I want us to first stop and think of this as a conversation. Sometimes it can be easy when we put on our ambassador badge to say, hey, you know what? I've got all this information I want to give to you, but so much about what two-way communication really is trying to genuinely ingrain in us is that sometimes being the person that's listening is 10 times more important than being the person that's giving that information. And so let's start fundamentally there with this notion of, as we have this desire on our daily basis to try to go out and say hello and to acknowledge people and build community, remember that it is a loop of communication. Sometimes we forget that a conversation, the best conversations are ones in which the conversation goes back and forth. And our two-way communication is about that. Now, how that looks and feels on a regular basis to you could be, I remember to follow up with someone. So you heard, you heard a good story about someone that had a need for information, and you being willing to listen, hear, remember, and following up is an important thing that you can do. So you can provide that follow-up that is so important to actually showing that you're listening and caring. Now, for us, what we hope that looks like and feels like is that we want to continue to cultivate these meetings to be a little bit of talk from us, but also a lot of talk from you all. Like, what did you experience this month? Share with us a story of something that was challenging, or if you couldn't get to that challenge, why was it that you couldn't? So we know. Be the person that shares that feedback, because you become our eyes and ears. You become our person that helps us understand what's going on in your micro communities or your different communities that you relate to on a regular basis. So you then also become that two-way conduit for us. You can listen and talk and engage in your communities, and then we want to listen to you to know what your needs are, to know what the needs are within your groups are. And so whether that means for you also looking and saying, do I have a little journal somewhere where I can write down little notes? I mean, I'm not talking journaling, but I'm talking like, do you have like a little spot where you can jot down little things? Sometimes it's just little Post-it notes. Sometimes it's maybe something you have on your phone, and you just tuck that away as like, oh, that was an interesting nugget of thought. I need to remember to bring that back to, to the group when we're talking. That way, when we're providing our information and support backwards and forwards, we know what ones we can fine tune the needs to for you all. But as we provide that information, we're making sure we're staying consistent with what we know and what we need. The more we ensure that we have this flow of support in all directions, and that we're there and authentically listening and engaging with one another, the more that we know that we're getting the message out there that actually needs to get out there, and not the one we just think might need to get out there. I had a good conversation with someone here in the sports world not too long ago. And they said the hardest thing is not engaging. The hardest thing is showing up and re-engaging. And I thought that was an interesting, because it really, in that conversation you talked about, like, I listened, I heard, I asked them to like come back with some other information, and then they never showed back up. And so a lot of two-way communication is also establishing this bond that we are not only going to do this, but we're going to come back, and that we are going to return if we don't have the information, with the information you might need. And that also then gets into our third pillar, which talks a little bit about resources and resource sharing. Now, I want to acknowledge right off the bat, we are humans. I hope. There may be an AI chatbot here somewhere, but I think authentically we are all humans, and that's part of why we're here today. And as humans, especially humans that want to be well-being ambassadors, we have an inherent desire to do well and to help others. That's just part of the ethos of coming to programs like this. In doing that, generally speaking, when you then think about resource sharing, here's like two scenarios that usually play out. One we heard today, which I thought was really helpful to understand. It's kind of that it's not a pressing need, but we know, hey, I happen to be chatting with you, or I know that you're doing this. I'm curious what's out there. And these low pressing needs, this is when it really is important that you try to be the book. And when I say be the book, we gave you a great book of resources. But that book of resources, like any book of resources, is incredibly not like, it's not engaging. You can be that engaging factor for this information. So whereas it might be hard for me to want to get that book or read that book, or it might be in doing that, I'm acknowledging that maybe I need these resources. And so that physical action of actually getting a book or grabbing a book or opening it can be difficult. You just knowing that book is you authentically engaging in resource sharing, because it gives you the wealth of information that is available to people and allows you to spread the word correctly about the resources that are there. What it also does, or what you can also do in these moments that are what I consider less pressing, is you can help them normalize what can, for some people, feels like non-normal, feelings. Like when you look and say, and you have a conversation and they are maybe willing enough to like say, yeah, I'm kind of interested, or like, I don't really know what's out there as it relates to this support. They're already being authentically vulnerable to you. And that's a big part. That means that they trust you to some degree. And that vulnerability needs to be met with, again, an ability on your end to start normalizing this behavior. Like, oh, I understand completely why. You might feel like there's not a lot of resources out there, but actually there are, so you can help them to start thinking, oh, okay, there are things here. And maybe I am a little bit, not isolated by the idea of these feelings, and it's okay. So when you're thinking about this first area or understanding, like, yes, this is what it looks like. Now, I will say there are probably going to be moments, especially depending on the type of person you are within your community, where when they're coming to you, it's because they know who you are, and there may actually be a little bit more immediate crisis than you're aware of. Or that they are finally like, ooh, this is a crisis, or is emerging crisis, and I remember this person talking about this, and so I'm going to reach out to them. My first reminder to you is that we are not crisis educators. We are not trained to be community crisis support in that sense. We're asking you to know what resources are available. And if you sense, and this is where the whole human thing comes in, if you sense that there's an immediate crisis, to know the two most important numbers that can save a life. And so if you can know those two numbers, and sometimes it just means sitting and saying, listen, I'm a little worried about you. Here are these two numbers. Would you like me to sit with you while you make that phone call? Sometimes that's all it is. Resource sharing is not about you being the expert, not about you being able to talk someone out of a crisis or talk someone out of a moment of sheer desperation. That's not what a well-being ambassador in terms of resource sharing is. And that's an incredible burden that I don't want you to feel like we're placing on top of you. I want you to be people that can go out in this community and know that as a human, if you sense that there's something wrong, you have the emergency crisis numbers available to you right on the tip of your tongue that you're willing to advocate for. And if you feel the need, that you could sit down with that person and just be a support, like literally, like, I'm just sitting here while you call this number. What I want you to not feel like you have to be is the person that is actually creating the intervention, because that in and of itself is beyond the scope of what we can do unless we're trained on it. Now, having said that, there may be some of you here today that are community members that are like, no, actually my role in the community I'm in, I feel like I might get some of this information or some of these requests in, and maybe I need to know a little bit more. And so we're going to talk in just a few moments about some trainings that will help you feel that you can accomplish some tasks a little bit better. And that's, again, part of that whole like wraparound approach that we really want to take to being a well-being ambassador. But just take this as you're walking away. Just understand that the resources that we have are here for everyone in the community to know about. If you, if nothing else, just become the biggest advocate for, hey, here's what's happening, here's what we can do, then you're doing the right thing. Please don't feel like we're asking you to carry the burden of being an intervention for every crisis that comes. If you can just help one person find their way to the resources that are already available, you have done a beautiful job.